The Quarterly, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Lesson 2, Leviticus 10, Polluted Worship. The Lord chose Aaron and his family to be priests and to approach him to serve in the tabernacle. But it's clear from the outset that Aaron and his sons were not chosen because they were particularly holy people. While Moses was being given extensive instructions on top of Mount Sinai about appointing Aaron and his sons as priests, in Exodus 28 and 31, Aaron was busy in the valley below making a golden calf for the people to worship, Exodus 32. Similarly, in the book of Leviticus, immediately after Aaron and his sons had been ordained to their new office and begun their ministry in Leviticus 9, two of Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, were struck down for the offense of approaching God with unauthorized fire. The worship of Israel's holy God is a serious business, and those who engage in it need to pay close attention to the rules that are laid down by God. Rules that are reiterated and clarified further in this chapter, Leviticus 10. Yet the chapter closes with a conversation between Moses and Aaron that reminds us that sometimes what is most important is following the spirit of God's laws rather than the exact letter. There's nothing legalistic or mechanical about serving the Lord. At the end of Leviticus 9, the offerings were presented by the newly ordained priests in the prescribed way, Leviticus 9:16. And fire came out from before the Lord, that is, from the tent of meeting, to consume them on the altar, 9:24. It was an impressive event, a successful conclusion to the ordination of Aaron and his sons to the priesthood. What happened next, however, highlights the need for constant care and attention to do everything according to the rule when it comes to the worship of God. Nadab and Abihu, two of Aaron's 4 sons, took coals, put incense in their censers, and offered up unauthorized fire, Esh Zarah. Korah's incense offerings in Numbers 17:5 was rejected because he was an unauthorized person, Ishzar. So it's clear that here the specific issue was with the coals Nadab and Abihu used, in contrast to the fire that the Lord provided at the end of Leviticus 9. The pattern of the Lord's command, followed by obedient response, which occurs repeatedly in the previous chapters, was broken, with catastrophic results. Nadab and Abihu appear to have thought that they could improvise a little in worship. They acted in a way that, though not explicitly forbidden, was not in line with what God had commanded, and the result was instant incineration. The punishment fitted the crime. Since they offered unauthorized fire, they were consumed by fire from the Lord, Leviticus 10:2. The Lord, who earlier demonstrated his glory by destroying the Egyptian chariots and horsemen in Exodus 14, now demonstrated it by striking down his own priests when they failed to treat him as holy, Leviticus 10:3. Since Aaron and his 2 remaining sons could not defile themselves as priests by touching the dead bodies, others of their relatives had to be summoned to take the dead bodies outside the camp to be buried, still in their priestly tunics, which were apparently untouched by the sacred fire. The failure of Nadab and Abihu clearly demonstrates the point that Aaron and his sons were not chosen because of their personal holiness or righteousness. They were chosen by God and separated from the common people so that they might showcase God's glory and holiness, not their own. God's election is entirely of grace, not because of our righteousness. Yet Aaron's other sons learned from this catastrophe. When an Israelite later showed utter contempt for the Lord and for God's people by bringing a Midianite woman into the middle of the community to sleep with her, his actions brought a plague on Israel, which was only stopped by the pointed intervention of Aaron's son Phinehas, using the tip of a spear, Numbers 25, 6-15. In return, a covenant of peace was established between God and Phinehas, so that the high priestly line descended through the sons of Phinehas, as we can see in 1 Chronicles 6. The next section lists a series of rules and regulations for priests, which are brought together here under the general theme of the necessity of the priests to maintain a proper sanctity. The list begins with specific instructions for Aaron and his sons not to show outward mourning for the loss of a loved one by disheveling their hair or tearing their garments. Leviticus 10, 6-7. Of course, they would certainly have felt deep sorrow in their hearts at the death of those whom they loved. But as those who served in the presence of the Lord of life, they could not display their sadness outwardly. Nor could they leave their posts within the tent of meeting. As priests, they were essential workers, necessary for the safety and blessing of the community as a whole. Leviticus 10:8 prohibits priests from drinking on duty, from which some of the rabbis inferred that Nadab and Abihu's deaths were caused by their being drunk. However, it seems more likely that this is merely a timely warning to other priests of the dangers that are involved in sacred ministry before the Lord, and therefore of the need for them always to be in full possession of their faculties. In addition to offering sacrifices, the priests were required to teach the people to distinguish between things that were holy, that is, fit to appear in the presence of a holy God, and things that were common, things that were fit for ordinary purposes, but not suitable to present to God. Verse 10. They were also to distinguish between things that were clean and unclean, which is a topic of much of the next portion of the book of Leviticus. In this way, the people would know what things had defiling power, whether temporarily or permanently, and what things were safe to eat or handle or touch. In return, the priests received part of the sacrificial offerings as their food. Since these were holy, they had to be consumed by the priests in a holy place. All these regulations highlight the importance with which the priests were to guard their own state of ritual holiness if they were to serve in the presence of a holy God. After Nadab and Abihu had been struck dead, a sin offering of a male goat was made to purify the sanctuary, and its blood was applied to the outer altar, reflecting the fact that the sin had been committed by leaders in the community. Leviticus 10:16, and we can compare Leviticus 4:23. According to the regulations of Leviticus 4, the remaining priests should then have proceeded to eat the meat within the sanctuary area, as Moses pointed out in verse 18. But instead, the body of the goat was taken outside the camp and burned, verse 16. This was the disposal method prescribed by the law for more serious infractions, those committed either by the high priest or by the entire community, Leviticus 4:12 and 21. Moses was understandably angry at this breach in the rules, given the disaster that had followed the earlier failure to obey God precisely, verse 16. Yet Aaron explained that since the disaster had impacted the priesthood itself and taken place within the sanctuary, it didn't feel right for the priest to eat the meat of the sin offering. Rather, they instead adopted the disposal method that was required for more serious cases, by burning the body of the offering outside the camp, verse 19. Even though the letter of the law had not been followed, Aaron explained that he had upheld its spirit, and so Moses was satisfied with Aaron's explanation, verse 20. Now this passage teaches us important lessons about our worship. In the New Testament, we're all priests, 1 Peter 2:5. And therefore all Christians are held to the high standard of sanctity that was required of the Old Testament priests. Even though we are not in danger of being struck dead by God, as some of his Old Testament servants were when they erred, we could see also 2 Samuel 6, verses 6 and 7, coming into the presence of a holy God is a serious matter, and it's important that we seek to worship him according to the ways he has instructed in his word. We too need to distinguish between holy and profane. We're not free to add or subtract from those biblical principles, especially when it comes to worship. At the same time, the end of Leviticus 10 reminds us that our heart attitude is even more important than following the precise regulations of worship. It's possible for us to obey all the rules carefully and yet miss the heart of worship, which is that our hearts are attuned to God. Fortunately for us, we're not saved by the orthodoxy and perfection of our worship, but by a perfect Savior, who came and worshipped the Father in spirit and in truth in our place. His holy obedience covers the many failures and sins that would otherwise so often make our worship like filthy rags, unacceptable to the Lord. See Isaiah 64, verse 6. Application questions. 1. Why is it important that our worship be governed by the Bible alone? What other things might we be tempted to use as guides for our worship? 2. How is New Testament worship both like and unlike Old Testament worship? 3. What does the priesthood of all believers mean? What priestly things have you done lately? 4. Why is it important that Jesus is the perfect worshipper?